Welcome to the Psychedelic Support Monthly Speaker Series. I'm your host, Dr. Allison Fiducia, also go by Allie. And it's wonderful to have you all here for this very special topic. As I was just saying, we've never covered anything on tarot readings. And so I'm really excited to hear from an expert about how we may be able to apply this type of transmission into our integration process, or preparation for that matter, with expanded states of consciousness. Our speaker today is Angeliska Polacheck. They is an Austin, Texas-based writer, healer, and a professional tarot reader for over 30 years. Devoted to helping seekers find their path, they utilize the tarot in a compassionate and trauma-informed combination of visionary, mystic counseling, and energy work. I had the pleasure of meeting Angeliska in Austin several years ago, I think about 10 years ago, around a MAPS event. And so we've stayed in touch since then. And she has received some recognition in the Chronicle's Best of Austin Awards as Austin's Best Tarot Reader Psychic for the past 10 years running. So that's amazing. Amazing to see awards in this area. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thanks everyone for coming. It's wonderful to be here. Very, very exciting. I am, as Ali said, I'm Angeliska or Angel, and I'm here in Austin, Texas, where I was born and raised. And I've lived in New Orleans for about 7 years, which is where I got my start reading professionally. Um, I started reading for the general public in 1999, and inherited my mother's tarot deck when I was 11 years old. She passed away when I was 7. And a few years later, my father decided I was ready to receive her cards and to also learn about the I Ching. And he gave me a stack of books. And being a precocious kid, I just felt, yeah, like ready to dive in and to learn as much as I possibly could about this aspect of the occult and spirituality, and it's been guiding my life for many decades now. And so it feels like a big honor to get to guide others using this medium and this powerful tool for self-understanding and for depth of experience, especially for people who are doing big journeys in their healing and using various plant medicines to move trauma through their bodies. A lot of the people I work with um, are doing that work, and it has been so powerful for me in my own healing journey. Um, so it's been really incredible to get to see how the cards integrate our integration and how they work and weave into the symbols that come up, and often these really profound experiences that sometimes we come away with variously shattered or confused or in a place of just being completely blown open and trying to understand what we do with those experiences and with that information and with those sensations can be, yeah, it can be difficult. So having support in that is is a big thing, and being able to be part of that journey with people is just a deep honor. So, um, Allie, I just want to check in and see. Um, right now, I'm only seeing you. Is there a way so I can see everyone to check?
Well, unfortunately, we do a webinar format for these recorded sessions.
Okay.
But we can, if you wanted to have a guest or a person to do an interactive thing with, I can ask for a volunteer, and then I believe I can bring them on as a panelist.
Let's save that for the Q&A. I'm really
Okay.
looking forward to questions. So,
Okay.
guys, if you have questions, let me know. And for right now, I'll just be playing off of you, Allie, since I can see you. I've never done it this way, so thanks for your patience with that. But yeah, I would love to share more about my own journey and about some of the cards that I see coming up over and over again for many of the people I work with as they're exploring. Um, so I've been working, as I said, with the cards for many decades, but also with plant medicines and with healing for a long time. And back in 2019, I had a very deep experience of sitting for 8 consecutive ceremonies that were very, very profound. And I came away from that quite blown open, and also with the recognition that maybe I needed to really take some time and integrate what I had experienced before coming back to deeper work, which is something that I often see, I think, as this work has increased in accessibility and popularity, that people, I think, sometimes have the drive to just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and seeking more answers, and without actually taking the time to properly integrate what they're experiencing and what is happening for them. And it's very humbling to have had that experience myself. So to know firsthand when it's time to like slow your roll and actually take, for me, it was a few years where I wasn't doing any deep work or any journeying of that nature, to understand what was happening in my life. And one of my big teachers that I was working with at that time often will say, you know, the most important aspect of medicine work comes after we go home and are seeking to integrate what we've learned in circle into our daily realities. Because I think that it's what needs to be integrated most in our healing work, and particularly in ceremony space or in altered states of consciousness space. It's what comes up from the deepest parts of our psyches. And it's often that shadow self, or our unconscious aspects of self, the things that we've pushed down or pushed away in our day to day and in our conscious lives. So aspects of our unconscious minds and our emotions, and these um, these pieces that sometimes get exiled or banished from the day to day because they don't seem to fit, or they are, causing issues, or they're needy, or they're noisy. And when we can no longer ignore them, when we don't have the option of just pushing them to the edges, and banishing those parts of ourselves, and we're forced to sit with them, which I feel like so many different kinds of medicines really have a way of disarming our defenses and bringing these hidden aspects of self, and hidden even memories or experiences right up to the forefront and saying, hi, it's time to deal with this now. But that can be overwhelming, and not all of us have access necessarily to support, to therapists who understand what we're going through. I've been very grateful to have had that, and to have people who, even if they didn't have a lot of experience with what I was dealing with, were very supportive and understanding of the work that I was doing. Um, and so getting to do that for others now, and to pay that forward, is such a blessing in my life. I want to share a little bit about, what it is to bring tarot into preparing. Ali mentioned that, yeah, the integration after is a big part, but I don't know about any of you, if this is a part of your lives or part of your practice, or what you're working with, but I often will go through long phases of pulling daily cards. At one point, it got really elaborate. I have a lot of decks here that I'm excited to share a few of my favorites with y'all. But I collect tarot decks and oracle decks, and at one point I was pulling like 5 different cards and like writing a haiku that was an amalgamation of all of the cards that I pulled up every day. And so my journaling practice got very involved for a while, to the point where sometimes with our practices and our rituals, it's nice to just let go of them completely for a bit. So I just stopped for a while. And then recently I've gotten back into pulling a card a day from just one particular deck, and then got another one. And so now I'm kind of playing with adding 2 in. Um, but I would often pull a card from a few of my favorite decks, including I really love this Animal Spirit deck, an Animal Guide Oracle, because animals come up a lot in my deep experiences. Um, Both of these decks are from Kim Kranz, who does the Wild Unknown deck, the Animal Spirit, and this Archetypes deck. And working with archetypes and working with symbols, which animals are part of, can really often guide our journey. But it can also be kind of intense if you know, pull a card like, for instance, this is the archetypes deck, which is, I love that it's round and the back is diamond. A card like the fault line, or I've definitely pulled the tower before a ceremony, and that's a bit intimidating, right? To go into a deep experience knowing that what's on deck might be really intense and might even be incredibly challenging and difficult. But having that on my altar, you know, before in front of my little space to guide me and to support me and to kind of anchor my awareness in like, oh yeah, right, that's what we're doing, can be incredibly helpful. And I feel like um, working with these archetypes and working with these medicines are one of the few spaces in our modern culture where we have the opportunity to experience an ego death, or even what can be like a really profound experience of death and dying in our human bodies through the psychedelic experience. Um, or of metamorphosis, of transformation. One of my most recent experiences, I fully went into the experience of dissolving as a caterpillar in a cocoon and just recognized how profound that metamorphosis is and how truly brave butterflies are for going through it. And we think of this symbol of the psyche, the butterfly. I think a lot of people see butterflies as being very like light and kind of playful. Um, but they are hardcore when you think about what they go through in order to experience that transformation and to experience that evolution of being, an evolution of spirit. It takes an immense amount of courage. And so anyone that is doing that deep work on whatever level, using whatever mediums or tools, I just have immense respect for the courage that it takes to potentially go into that little cocoon under your blanket and completely liquefy your consciousness and to go into this, you know, often really terrifying and intense altered state, and to trust that something bigger than you is guiding you through it. And so working with a card like death, which is so much about transformation, personal evolution, more than just a physical death, um, it's a card that can intimidate a lot of people when it comes up in a reading. And yet when I see this come up in a reading for someone or even for myself, I'm like, yes, all right, transformation station. Let's go. Let's evolve. Because if you don't grow, you don't evolve, if you're not willing to transform and to release old aspects of self, to shed those old skins, we don't evolve, we don't grow. Right. So it's necessary often to come up against these aspects of self, and be willing to release some of our stories about who we were, who we have been, if we're going to grow. And I feel like that is some of the deepest work. Another teacher of mine often will say it is such an incredible blessing to get to experience death in life and to get to go through that. So if anyone here has had this experience of dying in a psychedelic setting, going through whether an ego death or an experience of death, I've had a few now. They're a lot, they're intense, and I'm very grateful for them because I feel like what we know about our actual point of death and the chemicals that are released in our in our brains and what happens. I don't know if anything else could really ever prepare anyone for that. So, um, yeah, Ali, do you know, I feel like you might know what I'm talking about. Um, have you ever had one of those experiences?
I have, along with the rebirth experience, as someone else is commenting here in the chat. So if you're not familiar with these concepts, Stan Groff describes these matrices of the birthing process, which sometimes can be preceded by the death experience of the ego in the now, or how we associate and affiliate with ourself in this life. And then in altered states of consciousness, you can actually experience either pre-birth or other experiences not in this realm of being.
That's a really good point. Yeah, also the rebirth. I mean, if anyone's got to experience their own birth and becoming, what a profound blessing. And I've pulled a few cards that actually speak to these points of healing. So we have death. When I think of rebirth, of course, I think of the Fool, starting over blank slate, tabula rasa. I also think of the Fool as the little butterfly. I love in this particular deck, the Pamela Coleman Smith or Rider Waite deck, uh, where the Fool's little sleeves look like butterfly wings to me. And the fact that the fool is on the edge of this precipice, starting out brand new and recognizing that in order to go forward, they have to learn to fly, to take that big leap into the unknown, right? Which I think is also something that comes up for us um, with the psychedelic experience. Often when the fool comes up for someone, I reference you know, what it was like for music and for culture in general, and for so many people in the 1960s to first have this access to these experiences. And I like to reference how the music of the Beatles changed really dramatically from when they first started experimenting with psychedelics, and this sense of like childlike wonder and childlike joy and everything being new, and how you might look at something that you see every day and suddenly it's like, wow, what is that? Clouds are incredible. And you have this openness to it. Um, the sun is another card of rebirth, and particularly rebirth in the body, coming home to the body, which is a theme that I see in working with a lot of these medicines that really bring us back in touch with our physical form, which is something that I feel like we get disconnected from in today's culture, and also from experiencing trauma. And particularly if you have childhood trauma, developmental trauma, birth trauma, disconnect from feeling like I'm allowed to be here in my body. I am welcome. I am loved. I am safe, which is something that all babies, all kids deserve to feel, right? But many of us, because of our experiences, maybe didn't get or have access to, right? And so to be able to have that in these experiences can be so profound. And again, once you go through that and then you come out of it, how do you keep that connection to your body, your connection to this joy, your connection to that sense of wonder? I think that's where the work, again, really is. And it's through our daily devotional practices and our connection to ourselves, sometimes our prayer practice, our journaling practice, stretching, being in nature. The star really covers that. And I say that when someone is trying to integrate a really profound experience, this is when it's really time to come back to ourselves and come back to the ways of connecting with ourselves that are deeply intentional. So when I say daily devotional practices, yeah, it could be pulling those cards and really sitting with them and noticing the ones that keep coming up for you, journaling about them, journaling what they're bringing up for you. Also writing down Where's the moon? Writing down your dreams, the symbolism and archetypes that come through in our dreams. I often see carrying these through lines from our deep experiences to what's happening in our unconscious or sleeping mind, and the dreamlike imagery and symbolism and powerful themes that might have come up in our recurring dreams over many years. Can be really made manifest, especially through doing that lucid dream work. Working with both psychedelic medicine and a tool like the tarot is a way of directly accessing our subconscious or unconscious sleeping mind, our sleeping selves, our shadow selves, these aspects that, again, are pushed down, suppressed, oppressed, repressed. That's everything that's moon energy. And moon energy can be very intense, very chaotic. We're cruising into a new moon in Aries, which will also be an eclipse, a partial, I think it's a solar eclipse. So it's whenever we're in that eclipse energy, it does tend to shine a light on a lot of what has been hidden, a lot of what has been suppressed. And I think about the things in ourselves that are demonized, that are told, we're not allowed to experience them. So I just want to make a little space for both the moon and the devil, because I do see these cards coming up often. And also with a psychedelic experience that someone um, outside of support, outside of a circle might experience as like a bad trip, right? Maybe some of you have had an experience that was just rife with like really dark energy or imagery or things that you just were like, what is this? And again, I think often it's our shadow, it's our fear, it's the stuff that we're told we don't talk about that, that's not for the dinner table, that's not for polite conversation or for polite society. And the more repressed a lot of those things are, whether it's our sexuality or our wildness or our animal nature or our connection to our body or the fact that we are in these, messy, stinky, human fallible bodies. The devil is really like it represents a lot of course, as many of the cards do, there's a lot of different aspects, but in this aspect for today, really honoring the pan satyr part that is our often our repressed animalistic nature. And I think that can be really profound if you've ever, found yourself, on all fours, grunting wildly or howling at the moon or pawing at the ground or, whatever that animal archetype is that's coming through that, you know, our ancestors and forebears who had these shamanistic rituals and ways of being with nature, ways of being with the animal world, that were also ways of being with shadow aspects of self, with the parts of ourselves that have these wilder emotions. And so making space for the deep and often heavy and dark emotions. Fear, anger, sorrow, grief. Again, these are things that tend to get pushed down. And I would say almost any extreme of emotion is something that's pretty discouraged in our culture and society. I think we get told like, don't not too much, tone it down, reel it in. Someone mentioned in the chat that you pulled Death and Ten of Swords right before your last journey. And I just want to speak to the Ten of Swords in particular, because I think this is a really big one. And it's been a big part of my journey with healing really intense grief. Um, but I also want to mention, while we're at it, the Ten of Cups, because these experiences can bring such unbridled emotional expression. So maybe you're feeling like total ecstasy. Like many times I've just been like crying with joy and like my heart is exploding and it's like I'm having a soul orgasm, and it's the most indescribable, profound, powerful thing. right? And maybe even in the same night, I'm on the floor sobbing, screaming, like in my darkest, lowest point. And so these cards, the Ten of Cups and the Ten of Swords, these are it's the high highs and the low lows, the zenith of our joy, and almost that overwhelming experience of just being so completely bowled over by beauty. Whenever Ten of Cups comes up, I always think of this video that was one of the first kind of YouTube videos, I guess, to go viral. It was a guy who later I found out was a friend and mentor and teacher of a dear friend of mine in Hawaii, um, who was experiencing a double rainbow. And he was so just like in awe of the beauty of this double rainbow that he was like crying with joy. He's like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's so amazing. And it became like someone turned it into like a song and made a whole thing about it. And what struck me about that is that someone having this profound experience, witnessing a rainbow and experiencing this joy where he was crying with joy. Later, he said that he wasn't in an altered state at all. He was just, truly experiencing this but it's so alien for most people to see someone experiencing that joy that everyone was like, oh, he must have been in an altered state, must have been on something. And then it, turned it into this song because it was so unusual for people to experience that. I think many of us see a rainbow and we take a photo on our phone and maybe we post it and that's it. We don't actually stop to go, oh my God, look at that. And it's through often these big, deep experiences that we're willing to feel the immensity of that awe and that joy. At the same time, gonna have the high highs. You got to be willing to potentially face the low lows. And for people that are highly defended and have a lot of elaborate defense mechanisms, I can say that I didn't even know how many I had, how much armor I was wearing until the experience I had where all of that armor was removed and all my defense mechanisms were removed. And I found myself in a circle of about 40 people. It was a daytime ceremony. And I literally fell to the ground, fell to my knees, and was completely overwhelmed by the most intense waves of grief I had ever let myself feel. And it was all the grief that I'd suppressed for my entire life over my mother's death. I mentioned that she had died when I was 7. And I had been in this state of keep calm and carry on and keep on trucking and it's not that bad. And it was probably the first time in my life that I actually felt and acknowledged, like, no, it really is that bad. That is the worst thing that ever happened to me and could happen almost to anyone. And I was screaming on the ground, pounding, like really losing it. And at the same time was like, oh God, I just want to crawl back to my spot and hide and I don't want to be witnessed. But I recognize this is exactly where I need to be. And I kind of peeped through my, fingers at one point and saw all these people sitting up, supporting me, smiling at me, beaming love to me. And it was like, okay, this needed to be witnessed because I've hidden it for so long. And when I was able to go through that experience of completely falling apart, completely losing it, right? Going to this rock bottom of grief, surrendering to this pain and discovering that you can actually come through that experience in wholeness, and that it's such deep healing to be able to actually face this, right, and return from it. Um, it completely changed my relationship to this card. And when I came back from that experience and I started writing about what had happened through the lens of this card, it was so transformative to me, and it also completely changed my practice of how I work with this card. And when I see cards like Ten of Swords, Ten of Nine of Swords come up in a reading, I automatically just have so much compassion for the person that is dealing with these big energies. Nine of Swords is a card that often comes up when people are dealing with trauma, and especially when that trauma is acute. And for me, um, as somebody who has experienced, um, let's say, more than your average bear, loss, grief, big T traumas, complex PTSD, on multiple levels, like shock trauma, violent trauma, developmental trauma. Like I had uh, a healthy heaping helping of complex PTSD that I was living with for a long time, and it was affecting absolutely how I was functioning or not functioning in the world. Um, and I, had worked with many different therapies and many different modalities, and it was not until I started working with psychedelic medicine that I was able to um, really move the trauma through my body, right? And experience these big emotions and even reset my nervous system in ways that I don't know would have been fully possible in just a standard therapeutic setting. I can say that, I did decades of regular therapy, talk therapy, um, and was still really suffering from severe PTSD. And at this point in my life, I no longer identify as somebody who's living with PTSD symptoms. So when I see cards like Two of Pentacles, Six of Pentacles, um, in particular, and Five of Pentacles, these are cards that a lot of people, look at Pentacles and think, okay, it's money and it's the tangible world, and kind of ignore the body and ignore, yeah, the physical world, but also our physical world. And the fact that trauma is not just cognitive, but lives in our bodies, is stored in our bodies, and seeing the way that um, these are two cards that I really see come up, especially when we've got Nine of Swords. Two of Pentacles, Six of Pentacles are very much about being able to move that trauma through the body and being able to like feel those things on a really deep level. I see libido is mentioning the Page of Pentacles, and that's such an interesting one for working with inner child. Um, let's see, where are my court cards? I set them aside here, but I've got a few of the pages that come up, and I think doing integration work with these aspects of self, with inner child self, with like the spiritual seeker or the cosmonaut, the Knight of Cups, Page of Cups. I brought these out in particular that I think are really helpful for doing that integration. I have found a lot of parallels and a lot of healing using internal family systems, working with the court cards and working with these aspects of self that often deeply desire to be integrated into who we are now and who we are becoming. Um, and I think especially for people who are dealing with childhood trauma, developmental trauma, working with those inner child aspects of self is so powerful. And I love the way they come up in people's readings. Often the pages will come up and say like, "Hi, I need some help. I need some loving. I need to be acknowledged." And to integrate those aspects of child self instead of banishing them again, or exiling them or pretending that they don't matter, they're not there, is such a big thing. I did want to mention specifically Five of Pentacles as a card I see coming up to represent the pain body and the aspect of shadow self that often is exiled, is banished, is like living in the darkest, coldest part under the porch. And it's like that little alley cat that we're like trying to, beckon out with a can of tuna, and they're like, right? And when you say like it's safe to come out and to be seen, and this is our shame, this is our fear, it's our worry, it's the part of ourselves that feel like we're not going to be welcomed, we're not going to be accepted. And it's so wild to have an experience, especially with other people, where we can wail and scream and cry and feel things really, really deeply and really intensely. And my first experiences with that where I just wanted to like run away and hide after because I thought, oh, was I being too loud or too much? Or, oh, I can't believe I felt all those big feelings in front of these other people. And it was so wild having people come up to me later and say, like, good work. That was great. Thank you. Thank you for your tears. Like, oh, you're so strong for, I was like, for falling apart like that. And they're like, yeah, yes, And so shame cannot exist in the darkness and it can't exist, or it thrives in the darkness. It can't exist in the light. And so when we bring our wounding out into the light and into the circle, that's when we have the opportunity, I think, to do our biggest healing. And for that, I really want to bring up the Hierophant. I think this is a really misunderstood card. And maybe if you have questions about this card, bring them into the Q&A when we get closer to the end. But I just want to say that for me, right? And everyone has their own experience with the cards. There's no wrong way to interpret it. Everyone's got their own. And I'm not, even though I have so many years of working with these cards and working professionally with these cards, I want to be really clear that I'll never say, no, that's not the meaning of the card. Maybe it's not my understanding or my meaning, which has evolved, has changed as I grow and I deepen my practice. I'm learning all the time and I learn from so much from my clients. But my understanding of the Hierophant is really about spiritual community. And it's about the work that we do in the circle with other people. And this is not to say, anything about profound solo journeys that people have. But I think that there is something about doing deep work in a circle and in a group with people and also with facilitators, with shamanic practitioners, with people who are very skilled at holding that space and holding the container for that really deep work and allowing a space for us to be witnessed in our profound spiritual experiences. And for some people, when I think about shamanic ritual and I think about the way that we used to pray in a circle with like singing and dancing and, chanting and ecstatic experience, and maybe people, having big emotions, which in some, Pentecostal churches, people still do, they'll fall on the ground and have some big things happening. And I think that we've sort of lost that. At least in my experience of, I was raised by spiritual seekers, but my dad became Episcopalian at one point and raised me in the Episcopalian church. And it was a lot of like stand up, sit down, stand up, kneel, sing a kind of boring song. And I didn't really get it. And one day, my dad was very, very spiritual person, um, he was feeling the spirit and he was standing up in church and he was just doing this and I was like, Dad, sit down. And he was like, no, I'm having my experience. I'm feeling God. And now that I've had that experience of my own and my own churches and own experiences of spiritual community, I know what he was feeling. And I think about how, you know, again, we're taught, even as a little kid, I was self-conscious about his expression of connection with the divine. Like, we're not supposed to do that, right? And now it's like, no, that's exactly what we're allowed to do if we choose to. And, what a blessing it is to have some of these opportunities to connect very deeply to the divine and also to each other in the circle. So I'm just a big advocate of that, especially for our healing and for the parts of ourselves that need to feel welcomed and need to feel supported. Um, at this point in my life, it's not work that I necessarily think is benefited from being totally alone in it. That being said, something to be said for doing the deep inner work. And the Hermit is a card of knowing thyself, right? Some of us Some people, may choose to live the unexamined life, and never really go deep into the recesses of our past, our timelines, our psyches, our shadows. I really find the hermit to be the work, someone who's doing the work of seeking and who's willing to look within, is willing to go down into the basement of the psyche and root around in all the old dusty boxes and trunks and see what's in there. And often that involves looking at our past, looking at experiences that we may have completely forgotten about, that we haven't, even been willing to like crack open that old box and see what's in there. And the hermit encourages us to go into that darkness and to shine a light on what's happening in there and to face it and to integrate it and to know it and to know that if we're completely compartmentalizing all these aspects of self, can we really be whole? So I find the hermit will often come up after really deep work, even in a group setting. You can be in a big room full of people all doing their very, very deep work, sometimes going so, so deep into, your own personal underworld, into the root system of your psyche. And I think also, really understanding your past, understanding your timeline. I always say you got to understand where you're coming from in order to really get where you're going. And I think of our aspects of self, to be almost like little nesting dolls, like Russian matryoshka dolls, right? Like they're all inside of us, right? Just back to the inner child work. I've had a few ceremonies now where my inner child was completely present for the entire experience. And it was really wild to have this little kid self who was just right there going like, what is happening? What is this? And approaching it with like curiosity and wonder and being brought into that space really to receive the healing and to receive the welcoming and to receive the acceptance. Um, and like, again, what a profound opportunity to get to have something like that. Um, I just want to check in the chat and see. Um, Ooh, I love this comment from Eliza. After doing plant medicines in groups or with others for a long time, I did a journey by myself this week for my birthday. Beautiful, really transformational, like seeing into the caves of my soul. That is literally this card. That is what the hermit is doing, is holding a lantern, shining that lantern into the caves of the soul. And again, it's so brave to do that work. I think anyone who does this kind of work or is curious about it is approaching with bravery because you have a sense probably that some stuff is going to come up that you might have to face or you might have to deal with. And I feel that similarly working with the tarot. It's interesting because I read for all kinds of people, and I was telling Allie before we began that I just came from a 4 hour um, corporate tarot event where I was reading for people who, work for like a high-powered tech company. And here I am, like a witch, like I'm a full-time professional witch. I don't have a side job. I don't have a day job. Like this is what I do all the time. And because I have such a devotion to this work and to this tool, um, I don't sugarcoat what comes through in a reading. If somebody has an intense card, like these come up, um, I'm here to support them in it. And sometimes, especially at an event like this where everyone's getting readings, but there might be some people who weren't necessarily that into going deep or weren't that, ready to talk about their trauma or whatever it is. And I, am respectful and gentle with, only taking those people as far as they're really willing to go and as far as we can go in like a 15-minute 5 card reading for that kind of scenario. Um, but again, like if you have a deck of your own, if you're interested in the tarot, if you're someone that goes and seeks out readings, you probably know by now that the cards don't really pull punches. Like they will just hand it to you and be like, oh, so here's what it is. And if you don't want to hear that, if you're like, la, 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 like, I don't want to look at that. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to go there. Um, it's like, well, I guess don't look, maybe um you have to have that willingness to look at some of the stuff that we avoid and then figure out um how to make sense of it in our lives and how to see it as a gift and as something that's there to help us heal, something that's there to teach us, something that's there to help us transform. um yeah, Ilsa says, or maybe you don't want to go there as corporate mandatory fund. Yeah, I think there are definitely people at those events who are like, nope, not getting a reading, and I'm like, that's totally fine. And I also get the opportunity to connect with people who might never, ever, ever going to interact with anything like this. Um, and so yeah, it can be really powerful. Just want to be noting the time and give us some time for questions, because I have a sense that we have some, and I'm seeing some come through in the chat.
Yep, and there's also some in the QA box.
Oh,
So I could pull those up and ask.
yeah, would
And
you?
I do have one request. Do you think we could pull one card for the group?
Ooh,
We can think about as for the session.
yeah.
Be
Let me
personally.
do that. Let me
Or each
grab
of us.
my deck that
Yeah.
I actually use for readings. That one is kind of tucked away, but it's right here because I was just using it. These decks that I use, this one in particular that I've been showing you guys, is a large size tarot deck that I use for teaching because they're nice and big and you can really see the images. But let me grab my basket right here and pull my deck out and see what comes through. I would be really curious to see that. And while I'm doing that, um, I saw someone asked about Lilith, and I think that's such a cool question, Amy. Is there a specific card that resonates with Lilith in regards to reclaiming the wild woman, undomesticated, feral, feminine self? And yes, the moon all the way. I've seen readings where it's like the moon, Queen of Wands, the Empress, and it's like, here we go. I think someone else mentioned strength, and I think that is also great. But those cards in particular really make me think. I mean, Lilith and the moon, especially that lunar energy, and especially the aspects of that archetype that are, yeah, considered to be, aligned with darkness. Definitely the wild feminine. I always think of like a wild maenad covered in mud and menstrual blood on her, like that's the energy for
Mhm.
sure. Um, let's see. Okay. I want to speak to Ivana before I pull a card because I think this is really important and really speaks so much to um, what I'm talking about here. So Ivana says, the last time I did ayahuasca, it was a really hard experience, lost it completely, and couldn't understand anything after. I was going through a difficult situation, getting apart from an important person and managing it best I could. The ceremony was just pain and confusion. I never did a ceremony after that one. I was never in fear of going deep. I always chose the truth over pleasure. What do you think might have happened? And you know, I just have to say, I've been there. I've been there, and it can be so confusing, especially if you don't exactly know where that pain or that experience of suffering is coming from. And I think that often there are ancestral experiences that come through, past life experiences that have been unintegrated, things that we're holding from our previous aspects of self that need to be processed. And sometimes just like, I don't want to diminish it in any way, but it's sometimes like asking, like, why did I have food poisoning? Like, why did I have that flu? And why was I like, having it come out of both ends and on the floor moaning and crying and misery. It's like sometimes we just have stuff that needs to come out and needs to be purged and needs to be moved through our bodies and moved through our experience. And we're not being punished. We're not, being made to suffer. Um, but yeah, sometimes even the most absolutely wretched experiences that I've had that just seemed unremittingly like, what was the point of that much suffering? Later, I'm able to see the kernel of the profound in it. Whether it was like, oh, I needed to learn to ask for help in that experience because I was shivering and cold and miserable and I just wouldn't ask for another blanket, or I needed to recognize that, yeah, my suffering is not personal, that I'm not being particularly punished. Those are some things that I've taken away from uh, being incredibly miserable and deeply suffering in a ceremony, which has happened a lot, and I still come back, which is wild. My very first experience, many, many, many years ago now, was so incredibly brutal, and I think I screamed and cried and purged like the entire night. And I thought, in the morning, there's no way I would ever, ever subject myself to anything like that ever again. And yet, here I am. And I keep coming back. Okay, so I've got my deck. As you guys can see, this is a very well-loved tarot deck that has helped a lot of people over the years. And this is what I use to give my readings to my clients. Just taking a moment to tune in and let's see. Ah, how beautiful, the Chariot. I love that this is our card. Um, this is really about personal agency. It's about sitting in the driver's seat and recognizing that we are the ones that are in charge of our experience in a lot of ways. And at the same time, recognizing, as one of my big teachers says, Ishmael, to walk behind spirit, to let spirit lead us, to trust that there is something bigger moving us through. And I always see the Chariot as a perfect symbol of the collaboration between the free will universe, which is something I believe in, and the idea that we're always divinely guided, right? That it's a collaboration between fate, or higher power and ourselves and our will and our ability to choose which way we're going. And I also believe that we are being guided and that we are being directed if we choose to tune into that. And knowing who you are and doing your work is one of the best absolute ways to put yourself back into the driver's seat in the Chariot. Um, just a note about my experience with this card. My PTSD was so severe that I did not learn to drive until I was 33 years old because I did not trust my nervous system to propel several tons of steel through space. I was really afraid of hurting myself or anyone else. And after I did a lot of healing work, I was able to learn to drive, which is just so empowering and gives me so much independence and freedom of movement. Um, but occasionally I would still have dreams where I would be in the back seat or I would be in the passenger seat of a moving car, and a lucid dream where I would have to like get into the driver's seat and put myself back in so I wasn't out of control of my life. And so if that card comes up for any of you, it might, yeah, just be a thought of like what it is to be holding those reins. So beautiful card for our gathering. I know we're kind of at time, but do we have some time for that Q&A box or anyone else that wants to come and ask?
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes, so let's tackle some of these questions.
Yay.
So one of the first one is kind of a little bit of a practical question about if you're working with a client for integration of a psychedelic experience, how would you set it up? Would the client pull, or do you pull the cards? Are you using any specific decks?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that practical question. I will say if you're curious about working with me, please reach out and I'm happy to answer any of those like nitty-gritty questions of like what my process is and all of that. I do pull the cards and I do remote readings via Zoom and over the phone, which where I'm able to actually go even deeper than I am in person when I'm having to hold physical space, because I'm able to channel information in a deeper way. So it's not necessary for my clients to touch the cards, and now actually I don't even have people shuffle. I just shuffle as their proxy, which is it's a whole other element. And this is the deck that I always use for giving readings, um, which is the Albano Waite printing of the Pamela Coleman Smith or Rider Waite deck. Someone else was asking um, about how I clean and cleanse my cards, and I use salt and use yeah, various different methods, different magical substances to kind of help clean them, different powders. I really like bathing them in sandalwood powder. They seem to like that a lot, and using crystals. um but they don't tend to need a lot of cleaning energetically. I will say they are actually like filthy just from being handled and from being touched. So those I have to like scrape gunk off of them. But those are very like, yeah, practical.
You look
Um,
well loved.
very well done. Yes.
Okay, Michelle is asking curious about using reversals and how you might be working with these.
Great question. I love answering this question. It comes up a lot in my classes. I also teach tarot. I don't use reversals. I just don't. Some people do, some people love them. I always am so interested when I get a reading and the reader uses reversals. They just don't work for me. And I think that each card has so much in it already that we don't need to overcomplicate. I think every card has its like kind of positive and negative attributes that we can incorporate depending on what else is happening. So I just haven't found it useful in my own practice, but if other people like it, great. What I have found so much with my students is like a sigh of relief of like, oh, thank God, I don't have to use them. I don't have to memorize that. Okay, great. And I do think it just learning the card as it is enough often.
And what is a reversal?
So it's when a card will show up upside down in a reading. And I think that the way that some readers use it, which is part of kind of the turnoff for me, is to be like, oh, well, it's whatever the card would mean right side up, but like kind of opposite day of that. And I just don't, it just does, I don't vibe with it. It doesn't really work for me that way. I think there are times where it could say, oh, well, this is that energy, but it's being blocked in some way or it's stuck. It might just, what I see the benefit is where it gives a little bit more information or specificity. So I think it can be useful if you want to use it. But your practice is your own. And if anyone is interested in working with me or getting a reading with me or studying with me, I haven't been doing a lot of one-on-one students, but I have been doing classes online and here in Austin. So definitely reach out if that's something that interests you. I love teaching as well.
Great. And I've been dropping in the links into the chat, and you can also find them on the web page where you registered. Okay, I think we have time for maybe like one or two more here. This one's pretty quick. So do you work with people who bring their own decks?
It's kind of like bringing your own stethoscope to a doctor's appointment. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, some people have brought their deck and I'm like, that's cool. But, it's like you're coming to get a reading from me, so let's use this one.
Okay. Yeah, great. And so I think this will be the last question here is, can you talk about when to do tarot with plant medicine, pre-journey to help set intention, post-journey for integration during the journey?
Not during the journey. Okay. I know I see sometimes people furiously writing in their journals and like messing with their stuff that they brought. And I will say, that's kind of not the time. Not to put rules on anyone's experience, but I think that, whatever the medicine is that you're working with, that's what you're working with. And to honor that, to honor what they're teaching, what's being shown to you, what's coming through. That being said, if you want to pull a card or two to guide your journey and maybe have I've learned a small minimal altar in front of your space, maybe that's something that you're able to return to and remember and have it be a touchstone for you if you feel like you're getting lost in your direction. And then after, when you come home and are integrating, I would say if you have a practice of pulling a card a day and journaling and really sitting with yourself deeply and doing that star work that we talked about, your daily devotional practice work, I cannot overemphasize how powerful just taking that time with yourself can be. And even if that's not what you're going to be doing, maybe you're stretching, maybe you're breathing, maybe you're singing, but just taking the time to be with yourself is really where the integration I find happens in a powerful way. It's been my experience anyway. It works for me. Maybe it'll work for you guys too.
Wonderful. On that note, we can go ahead and wrap it up today. I appreciate everything you shared so much. There's so much to resonate with. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but you can reach out to Angeliska. I have dropped their website here and their social media channels. So I appreciate everything you shared. And this is a little bit esoteric for our conversations generally, which is wonderful to step from the therapy and the science into the world of spirit, because that's such a profound part of the psychedelic experiences. So I appreciate your sharing and knowledge and everybody who showed up today.
Thanks so much for having me, y'all. Thanks to everyone for coming. It was so special and just a delight to connect with you all, and an honor to be able to share what I know and have it be received by so many amazing people. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. See you next month. Take care. Bye.